Welcome to the Really Know Your Customer podcast with your hosts, Betsy Westhafer and Tony Bodo. Join Betsy and Tony as they dive in with highly successful C-suite leaders who have grown successful organizations by creating a laser focus on listening to their customers and building deep customer relationships. Now, it's time to join Betsy and Tony for the Really Know Your Customer show.
Welcome to the Really Know Your Customer podcast. I'm Tony Bodo, CEO of Tony Bodo International.
And I'm Betsy Westhafer, CEO of the Congruity Group.
Betsy, I am absolutely delighted that you've brought Jay Meyer to the podcast. I know you guys are longtime friends and you've worked together in business, but I got to tell you, just interviewing him, listening to him, today was the first time I met him, and I was blown away by our conversation. And the one piece I want to kind of direct the listeners to give them some hints toward, listening toward, is this idea of the culture that he built. And he'll talk about the journey that he went on in his business. I don't want to reveal too much here up front, but he'll talk about this journey that he went in his business, and he became a partner first, and then through multiple acquisitions, he stayed with the organization. But through that all, one of the pieces that I was really happy was able to dig into is, how did you build that initial culture? How did you keep the culture alive as you went through these different acquisitions, and what did that take? And he had some really good insights that I think all of our listeners will gain something from, because I know I gained something from it, and I've been in this world for a long time of really knowing your customer and listening to your customer.
Yeah, Tony, couldn't agree with you more. Jay and I have been friends for a long time, and one of the things that we always talk about when we get together is culture. We're both very passionate about culture. But I have to give you props for the question that you asked him that went even deeper on culture. And it's not just the culture of the company, but the culture that you keep within your own being. So also teasing that out to the listeners, because that was a really fascinating part of the conversation. I was thrilled to have Jay on the show, and I have always been very inspired by Jay and his story, which is amazing. And we're going to link in the show notes to a lot of his resources. He has multiple books. He's got a daily inspirational email. He's got a great podcast called the Higher Leader Podcast. So really excited. And so without any further ado, let's talk to Jay Meyer. Hey, Jay Meyer, it is so good to have you on the show. I've been looking forward to this for quite some time, and we're just thrilled to death to have you on the show today.
Hey, I am so excited, and I feel blessed that you asked me.
Yeah, well, and I had the good fortune of being on your Higher Leader podcast. And so it's fun getting to do the podcasting thing with you.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, hey, Jay, for our audience, can you start us off just by telling us your journey in business, your personal journey? Just help us let the audience get to know you a little bit better.
Sure. I'm born and raised in Covington, Ohio, which a lot of people get it confused with Covington, Kentucky, but we're up near Troy, Piqua, Ohio. And went to Ohio Northern University, played basketball, and actually got a degree in pharmacy. Went to work at our corner drugstore in downtown Covington that had been there since 1938. Started working there as soon as I got out of college, and actually did some internship there while I was in college. And the owner there, I know he recognized that I had an entrepreneurial spirit, kind of a visionary, strategic type thinker. And I started seeing opportunities in providing medications to nursing homes. And back then they were called like rest homes. And so we slowly but surely started providing medications to local rest homes, local nursing homes. And during a stretch, when I graduated college, 82, and from 82 to 87, I call that my long weekend. If you ever heard about John Lennon's long weekend when he went off for a year. But I got taken to my knees from a drug and alcohol addiction. And I was a functional alcoholic, functional addict. We were still growing the business at the time, but I was slowly going down the tubes. And August 9th, 1987, I was spiritually, financially, physically, mentally bankrupt. And thank God there were some people in my life that helped get me in a treatment center. And one of those people was the person that owned that pharmacy. And long story short, after 2 years of not knowing if I'd ever practice pharmacy again, not knowing if I was going to go to jail, because the DEA local prosecutor, state board of pharmacy. They were all involved in my case. After about 2 years, I was free to continue to practice pharmacy, and it was greatest blessing. I feel, if you don't believe in miracles, there's one for you. So my boss, he took me back and then eventually made me a partner in this pharmacy because we were gaining momentum in the nursing home industry. And I must say that time when I went to treatment and got my addiction in order, it was a totally life-changing event for me. I went from this egotistical, arrogant, driven, self-serving, selfish human being to someone that knew the only route for me was to be humble, because I had totally taken advantage of people and lied and stolen and cheated. So it's always important for me to note that it was life-changing, life-transforming for me. And we built this pharmacy to the best of our ability, the right way, taking care of our employees, taking care of our customers, charging a fair price. And by 1998, in the industry, it was a good time to sell. And my partner was 17 years older than me. He was majority stakeholder, and he allowed me to kind of broker a deal to find new partners, found a new set of partners in 1998. And what's crazy is we sold that pharmacy on August 7th, 1998, and my sobriety date was August 9th, 1987. It's like all those numbers go together. And it's just amazing. 11 years later, after being in the pits of hell, here I am, really feeling like I'm on the top. Because, I think it's every entrepreneur's dream is at some point somebody thinks enough of your business that they maybe will make an offer on it. And so then my new partners and I, we took this to a whole other level from a revenue standpoint, employee standpoint. By 05, 06, I think we were at like a $50 or $60 million business. And when we sold it, we were at maybe $6 million. When we sold it, we probably had 40 employees in 05, 06. When a private equity company came in, I think we had 200 employees. And then we had another acquisition along the way, pretty big player in the national space, bought us in 08. And in 2010, I probably in 05, 06, I started just getting this itch to go out and do something else. It's sort of like, I mean, you could run this business forever. I was getting paid more money than I ever thought I'd get paid. But it's like, you know what? I really enjoyed help building the teammates in the organization. It's like, I'm going to check out maybe being a life coach, maybe becoming an executive coach. So that's where my journey started in 2010. I was already a member of Aileron, and Aileron is this great campus for entrepreneurs in the Dayton area. And they asked me if I would help facilitate courses there and their leadership courses. I started doing that. That's when Betsy and my journeys crossed paths for the first time, and thoroughly enjoyed facilitating those classes and coaching the for-profit leaders. And then once again, my heart just kind of started going towards nonprofits. So the Mattil Family Foundation is very much involved with Aileron because it's the Mattil family that built Aileron. Started working with them to help the people that they give funds to better run their organizations like a business, and also coaching nonprofit leaders. So I've been doing that for probably 5 or 6 years, and thoroughly loving it. And I have been happily married for just over 40 years, got 3 children. Our oldest, Jason, has blessed us with 3 beautiful granddaughters and a beautiful daughter-in-law. And then our daughter, Michelle, she is climbing the corporate ladder at Cap Tech. If you've ever watched PGA golf and you see the trackers of the golfers' drives, in the air, her company is behind the software that makes that happen. It's pretty exciting. And then our middle guy, Jordy, he's developmentally disabled and still lives at home with us. And so, yeah, that's me in a nutshell. Probably longer than 5 minutes, but.
Oh, no, all good, Jay. Thank you so much for giving us that background. There's so much there that we want to dive into. One thing that just strikes me is what a powerful story as far as being able to overcome big, huge challenges and looking for the opportunity to be better because of it. And I love that part of your story so much. And it's very inspiring. Tell us a little bit as far as when you were building the company, obviously the show's called Really Know Your Customer, and you and I have talked about those customer type topics before. So tell us a little bit about the culture that you built as you were growing the company to the point of being able to be acquired.
Yeah, it's a great question because it goes back to the owner, and his name was Tom Hagen, and unfortunately Tom passed almost 2 years ago, but he actually was only the third owner of that pharmacy. It was started in 1938. So I come into this pharmacy as an intern in the late 70s, and I see nothing but excellent customer service. And Tom was one of these people that if a nursing home would call us and say, we need meds for Mrs. Smith, and we're also out of Dove soap. Could you stop at the grocery and pick up some soap for us and drop that off too? Tom would say, absolutely. He'd always say, we're the can-do kids. And I just picked up that it was a natural tendency to embrace the customer, that so much that when we started growing, there's a requirement with Medicare, with CMS, that every nursing home pharmacy has to go through every chart of the residents in those nursing homes once a month. So we have to review the meds. We have to sign off that they're safe and effective. And so I was the person primarily responsible for that. And I go in these nursing homes and, I'm sure there were some pharmacists that would just sign the charts and be done with it. I'd go in, they'd feed me lunch, they being the nurses, we would sit and talk. And it's like, how can we do our job better for you? How can we make life easier for you? And so it was almost just this natural tendency that Tom put in me, that over the years, some of the big competitors always say, Jay, we can't even get our foot in the door in your homes. What's your magic? And it was really listening to the customer. It was building these relationships, and they weren't fake. We cared about each other's kids and their sporting events and their school events and the health of the spouses and things like that. So, I wish I could say it was something that I read in a book and I tried it. It just kind of came natural because of working for a guy like Tom Hagen and what the customer meant. And I remember having an epiphany moment, Betsy. It was a Midwest American Society Consultant Pharmacist Conference. It was in Indianapolis, and Medicare was changing the way that we as pharmacists had to track the medications for those in nursing homes. And I was sitting there thinking, man, I could create some really neat charts for our nurses to save them time, because they were requiring them to keep track of the patient's behavior. It's like you couldn't just slap them on an antipsychotic or an anti-anxiety. You had to have proof that they were acting out, they were harming themselves, harming others. And the light bulb went off in my head. And I went back and I got with I don't know if you know Lisa Hanhauer. She owned MedPass. She's a Dayton area entrepreneur. I got with Lisa, who created documents for the nursing home industry. I said, I think we can create something to save a nurse's time. Long story short, we did that. And it just took us up to another level. And it wasn't about Jay Meyer inventing something new. It was just me sitting there thinking, how can I make this change that CMS is just stuffing down the nursing home's throat? How can I make it easier for the customer? And it was just times like that where, you're just constantly thinking, and I guess it was always approaching that relationship as a team. We were the pharmacy, they were the nurses, we had the doctor, and between the three of us, we provided the best care we could for the patients. Because let's face it, when a resident's in a nursing home, one of the primary ways they continue to thrive and stay alive is through their medications. So then, Betsy, what we did after that, as we started to grow, and Jay couldn't get into all the nursing homes, we had to, we hired other clinical people. We started putting together a customer advisory board, and we would meet periodically throughout the year, bring them to our place, had a conference room, we'd feed them and, share some ideas, what we were thinking about doing, what do they think, and then we would seek their input on what they'd like us to do, see if maybe we could do that. So yeah, you got me all pumped up. When you start talking customer, it's like I had this flashback to customers and teammates. It's like you can't take care of the customers if you don't take care of your teammates. So it's those two that I was just very passionate about.
I've got about a dozen questions I got to figure out how to get them all into this interview here. So, so a couple things that I want to hit on, and this is something Betsy and I have heard again and again, over and over, and the path that each entrepreneur, each CEO that we've talked to has gotten there has been different. But you talked very early on about your personal journey and reaching this place of humility. And one of the things that I think we've got to state that this is a law. In order to really get to know your customer, to really know your customer, you have to be humble. And no matter how you get to that place of humility, you've got to get there, or you're not going to be successful long term. How do you see that humility really playing out over the course of this journey you've been on?
Well, it's a great question, because like I said, the life transforming event that happened in my life just created this sense of humility inside me. But I believe that as entrepreneurs, as leaders, as business owners, we have to be curious. We have to be willing to say we don't have the answer. And it's one thing to say, I don't have the answer, but this is what I'm thinking about doing. What do you think? And then you receive the input and you don't listen to a word they say. That's the person that's not humble. The piece that's kind of the ego, arrogant, and believe me, I've been on both sides of those tracks. But when you say, what do you think about this? And they start just tearing it down, it's like, number one, that's probably not going to work. Or number two, I didn't do a good enough job explaining it. So let's try it again. Okay, this is what I'm talking about. Do you really understand what I'm saying? And I think, and this is one thing, Tony, the older I get, the more I realize the less I know. So the more curious I become. I mean, I knew it all in my 30s, and I ended up in a treatment center. That's where my best thinking got me. Almost bankrupt, completely bankrupt in my life. And so you walk out of there thinking, I don't know a darn thing. So that humility, I listened to a podcast, this has been some time ago, lady by the name of Kat Cole, who's now the CEO of Athletic Greens. She's had some kind of an entrepreneur business career. And she said, like, the 21st century leader needs to mix courage and confidence with humility and curiosity. And I thought that's so true, because we got to be confident. We got to have courage, right? I mean, Betsy, Tony, you guys wouldn't be doing what you're doing today if you didn't have courage and a little bit of confidence. But you offset those two, and you don't become too overwhelming with them by being curious, saying, hey, I don't know, you think this will work? What do you think? Or I'm interested in trying to better understand why you're not hearing me. And also just being willing to say, I don't have all the answers. I need help. I think about that time in my life when everything got flipped upside down. And one of the main reasons I survived that was the people around me, the people that came to my side and helped me through that. And when you have an ego and you don't have, you aren't vulnerable, you aren't humble, you just aren't willing to listen to people. And thank God the right people came in, and I was ready to listen.
It strikes me, Tony, that part of why we love doing these podcasts is because we get to just be in the chairs where we're just listening and being curious. And we talk on the side about how much we have learned from the guests that we've had on the podcast, and how then that translates into the work that we're doing. And so I think that curiosity is such a big, important part of it. And I agree with you. The older I get, the more I realize how little I know. And that's kind of a peaceful thing. I know you write about peace, and it's kind of a peaceful thing to know, like, yeah, I don't have to have all the answers. It's like that burden comes off of you of thinking you do have to have all the answers.
Kind of looking at, you went through multiple transitions, or multiple acquisitions, I should say, it over the course of the time you're with the pharmacy company. And I'm curious, I mean, one of the things we hear from people is that, when there's a transition from one ownership group to another ownership group, a lot of times the culture changes, mergers, acquisitions. Did you keep your culture alive? And if so, how did you succeed to do that? Or what did you find you had to do more of or less of?
That's a great question. The first acquisition that took place in 1998, it was a company that owned nursing homes, and they wanted to be an owner of a pharmacy. And I was a minority, it wasn't like I was a majority owner, but they treated me as if I was the owner of that pharmacy. And the CEO and the CFO of that company, I think sometimes I would drive the CFO crazy because they'd let me kind of go. It's kind of like, Jay, this is, and then they really say this is yours, but you can run this pharmacy the way you think it needs to be run in order to be successful. And so I was able to create our own culture. And it was at that point, Tony, that we had to create a more professional culture. We were kind of like this mom and pop drugstore, family type culture, which there's nothing wrong with that. And I work with organizations today when they're thinking they need to build a new culture. It's like, what are the things we need to stop doing? What are the things we need to start doing? What are the things that stay? So it's like we kind of sat down as an executive team and we really focused on the new things we needed to start doing, which kind of the other things just took care of themselves. So we stopped. And then what needed to stay? What's some of the history? Some of the, you got the myths, you got legends, you got all these great stories that you don't want to lose track of. Like Tom stopping at the grocery store to buy Dove soap when the nursing homes wanting some medication because they also are out of their soap. So that one, and that was from 98 to 06. That's where we really built an amazing culture. I mean, it was, our number one core value was to treat others better than we expected to be treated. We called it the golden rule +1. And, we wanted to create this challenging, safe, and fun work environment. That was something that we agreed upon. We were determined to show excellence in everything that we did. So like those were these three values that we all held true to. And then in 06, the parent company had the opportunity to sell, and they were hoping to spin the pharmacy off, and they weren't able to, and keep the pharmacy, but they had to go as a group, and it went with a private equity company. And private equity, they really didn't want us. Nothing against them. So they started looking for a buyer and sold us to, like I said, a pretty big national entity. And when that took place, I mean, I met with the owners of that and the leaders of that, and we felt like we had pretty similar values. But I will tell you, when an acquisition, when a merger takes place, whoever the majority owner is, those are the values. That's the personality the organization is going to take on from a culture standpoint. And there's nothing bad about that. I mean, that's just the way it is. And I saw that happening, and nothing against them. They had very good values. And that's when it's like, you know what, I think it's time to move on. So the one experience was fantastic. You know what I mean? And then prior to that, Tom and I building this little pharmacy and creating the culture we did. The second one, I had less ownership in it, very little. So even though I was running that pharmacy in Covington, Ohio, and we were taking care of the Midwest region, a different culture started happening.
Jay, I want to switch gears a little bit. One of the things that through the many years of our friendship that I have had such great admiration for, and something I try to emulate and pale by comparison, but your consistency in what you do. So I want to switch gears a little bit to more of the personal development sides of being a leader. And you've been writing this or the Eagle Launch email every day for I don't know how many years. You can fill us in on that. But I know your physical training, your spiritual training, your daily training of things you do, you're so consistent. So can you talk us through what it takes to find that consistency, what it means for a leader, what it means for you personally, for building a business? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, consistency is so key, especially when you're in a leadership role. And many of these habits, those habits that you mentioned, Betsy, I developed back when I was in early recovery. I had a very fragile, I was in a very fragile mental state back in that time. And I found that exercise was great for my brain. It would just help chill me. And also, if you talk to anyone who's been in recovery and who's made it, I'll be celebrating 36 years next month. Anyone who's made it for any extended period, most of the time, they believe in a power greater than themselves. And mine came through this relationship with Jesus Christ. And so something we learned early on in recovery was to have morning time with this higher power. Just the first 3 steps of the 12 steps are simplified. I can't, he can, I think I'll let him. And that's like every morning. I can't do this alone. I'll screw it up. I know he can. And then here, God, here's my life. Here's my business. Here's my family matters. Here's all the stuff the devil's going to try to attack me on today. I'm going to ask you to help guide me through this. So that physical exercise and the whole spiritual piece both played into my mental state and the consistency. I was at a retreat. We used to do this thing with the junior high in Covington. It'd be like an all-night retreat in the school, and we had a guest speaker come in, and his name was Harvey, and I can't think of his last name, but I'll never forget, because I was intrigued with thinking about maybe I'd be an inspirational speaker someday. And the guy was just in shape, and you could tell he had it together. And he said, if you're going to be an inspirational speaker, you got to take care of yourself. You're going to come in here and tell these people you got to be disciplined, you got to be consistent. Your habits determine who you are, what you become. And he says, so you can't present in front of them and not play that part. And I never forgot that. And so it's like when you're leading people, they feed off of you. I mean, they watch you, and that's part of the culture, I believe. But I also think it's important, and I do, Betsy, I don't want to not answer your question. I do have specific habits that I do every day. Like you said, I've been writing the Eagle Launch inspirational piece. I started that in 2008. And part of that, probably the primary reason, was I wanted to make a dent in what I call the devil's playground, the internet. I mean, back then in 2008, it's nothing like it is today from social media and all that type of stuff. But it's like, I'm just going to lob some positive thoughts out there. And then it became, it was like once a month, then maybe a couple times a month. And I thought, you know what, I'm just going to start once a day. And, and I write them, I'm usually ahead a couple of weeks. So if I happen to pass away tomorrow, you'll still get some blogs from me, Betsy, after my death, because I've already written them. So, but yeah, and I think the consistency, it also has to be a healthy blend with vulnerability. People need to know I'm not Superman. I mean, I have my moments, and there's going to be times, like my mom, she passed away back in March. And, here I am, this guy that people look at, is pretty strong and all that. And man, I went through a rough time, and it's like, I'm still having these little grief avalanches that just comes upon me. And I think as leaders, we need to be okay with saying we're not okay. I consistently do these things. I try to show up as the best person I can be every day, but there might be some times where Jay could have been a little better. So I think it's important that you mix the two.
I think that's so critical and important. A very good friend of mine who's also an entrepreneur, we were talking at one point a few years ago, and she has a medical condition, MS or something of that nature. And, she was really down this particular day we were talking, and it just struck me. It was just one of those moments of inspiration that I'm grateful that I was open for. I told her, I said, success is not comparing yourself to yesterday. Success is based on where you are today and doing the best you can today with who you are and what you're facing. And that's, I've needed that myself. And it struck me to share that, because I heard that in what you were just saying.
We're human. Sometimes
Exactly.
we forget that.
Jay, for people that are entrepreneurs or leaders that are maybe just in that period of time where they're struggling and just can't see the light of day. And I know for me personally, all the stuff that's going on in the world right now, it's hard to keep your head above water sometimes, because even if you try to block it all out, it just seeps in, all the stuff that's going on. What would be your advice to leaders, not necessarily leaders, just to anyone, as far as how do you keep that positive spirit? I know reading your email every morning is helpful. What are some of the other things that you would recommend to people that are just really just trying to catch their breath every single morning when they get up?
Obviously, I'm a big reader, read a lot. I also journal. And I journal, I think I capture a lot of my craziness in my journal. I filter before I enter the world. So part of my morning devotion and time with myself is I just journal and I just write thoughts. And like this morning, I kind of had a couple of challenges the last 2 or 3 days. And I just started journaling all the things that I have to be grateful for, because you cannot be afraid and grateful at the same time. You can't be angry and grateful at the same time. And it's like gratitude is it's just this disposition that can fight off. And to me, it's all about having the spirit and being full of the spirit. So I think journaling helps me. And of course, I mentioned my time with my higher power. I can remember, I can't remember the exact year, but I can remember a time in the business when we really started gaining momentum, is I would take time during the evening before I go to bed and just kind of capture everything that was going on with the business and just say, okay, God, here it is. When I get up in the morning, I know you'll have the answer. I know you'll, and I could fall asleep. So I think having that habit, and the next morning saying, okay, I get it, turning it back over to him, just having that belief and trust in that higher power that he or she is going to guide you through these tough times, just another great habit. And I think along with journaling, prayer, trust in a higher power, reading, listening to podcasts, you have to surround yourself with good people. Somewhere, and I consider John Maxwell my friend, even though I've never met him, but I've read almost all his books. I listened to his podcast. I just listened to Ryan Hawk's podcast this morning. Lencioni, Full Focus, the people, the Hyatts. It's just, I surround myself with good quality people that have like interest. And that's really important for me, because if I'm not doing that, I'm one that can easily get drawn to the world. And like you mentioned, Betsy, it's messed up right now. I mean, I'm into my 7th decade. I've lived almost 65 years, and there's a lot of challenges out there. And if you spend time paying attention to that, instead of paying attention to improving yourself and making the world better because of you and because of what you do, it can get you down.
I love this idea. What occurred to me as you're saying this, Jay, is that while you built cultures in companies, where you start though as a leader is building your culture within yourself. It's like you've surrounded yourself with these mentors, with these advisors who you've probably, many of them, as you said, have never talked to, right? But they get in your head and they influence the way you think. It's like we're creating a culture around ourselves, which we then take with us wherever we go in the world.
Yeah, Tony, that is such a great insight, because part of my morning time is reading. I have a mission statement to inspire others to dream more, be more, and live in the light more. And then I have these 3 guiding principles that come from the book of Micah in the Bible, chapter 6, verse 8. That's do right, give mercy, and be humble. And like, that is my culture. You're exactly right. That's how I go about doing my business, or I try. Some days let's just see, do right. Most of the time I do right. Give mercy is hard sometimes. Man, I still struggle with that. And I try my best to be humble.
Yeah. And I love what you said about, we're so fortunate to live in this time where we have access to all these amazing people. Just one click on YouTube and you can find a lot of stuff, or a podcast. And I listen to a lot of the same ones that you do. I've recently started listening to Ed Milet. I don't know if you know his podcast. So good. And so I think it's what you feed your brain as much as it is you feed your body. And so I can't believe how fast this time has gone. I hate to be the messenger that we are running out of time. Jay, any final thoughts you'd want to share with our audience? And I could talk about this stuff all day. Tony, I think this is where we're going to have to do a part 2 and get Jay back on the show.
Because I have questions after 2010. I've got a whole bunch of questions that we got to ask him yet.
This did go fast.
This is going to have to be a 2-parter for sure. But Jay, anything else you'd want to share with our audience? And one thing, I know we're going long here, but one thing I want to talk about is just how amazing it is what you give back to the recovery community, to the community of Covington. I had the good fortune years ago when you hosted a Thanksgiving meal, I believe it was, for your community, and just saw what you were able to do in terms of give back. And I really didn't want that to go without saying that, I'm sure your mindset is very much about giving back. So just a few thoughts on that before we close.
Yeah. And Betsy, I learned in my treatment journey, because I would wonder why are these people, I'd walk into an AA meeting and everybody in the room is just willing to help you. And I learned the truth behind the saying, you can't keep what you have unless you give it away. And so I learned that in recovery. You can't stay sober if you don't help others stay sober. And it's just like our community. The community gave me so much. I mean, that little pharmacy, I'm forever indebted to that and the people that worked here. And so it's like, I can't keep that. I have to give that back, and I have to, and sometimes it's hard with Jordy, our special guy, but I have found the means, like now through my podcast and through my Eagle launch, to just, whatever I can share with others to help lift them. And like I say, to dream more, to be more, to live in a light more, that I'm all in. Because at the end of the day, when we leave here, all the stuff we might accumulate, it means nothing. It's the lives that we've impacted along the way, and hopefully made the world a little bit better place because we consumed some air while we were here. I mean, to me, that should be the goal of all of us.
Jay, this has been phenomenal. I look forward to our next interview, because I've learned a lot. I've taken a bunch of notes here, and I think my biggest takeaway really is this: not just the words you've given us, but really the spirit of humility and vulnerability that you've presented here. And I hope our listeners really pick up on that, because I really do believe you cannot be a true leader unless you demonstrate and live those. And I can see it. I can see why Betsy puts you up there as one of her top friends, and why she was so excited to do this podcast. And I'm grateful to have met you today. Thank you.
Hey, very grateful to have met you too. And Betsy, I just so cherish our friendship. Really appreciate you.
Oh, likewise, Jay. And I'm looking so forward to part 2 of this. And next time we get a chance to go up to Miller Lane and have lunch.
All right.
All right. Thanks, Jay.
Thank you.
My gosh, I absolutely am so happy that we had Jay on here. Thank you for bringing him on, Betsy, and introducing us. The thing that really stands out to me as I step back and kind of reflect upon the things that we talked about, there's a common theme that we've heard over and over and amongst entrepreneurs and CEOs that we've talked with. And it's this idea of humility. They all get there in a different journey. Jay had a very specific journey that he got to his level of humility, but it's not just something they talk about, the humility, the curiosity, the courage, and the confidence. I think those are the 4 that he pointed out. It's not just that they talk about these things, they live these things. You can feel his humility. You can feel his vulnerability as he talks about his journey, and not just his personal journey, but also how he grew the company. And, just the fact that he was able to go into these nursing homes and sit there with the nurses and say, what would make your life easier? What would make your job easier? And then coming up with these forms, of all things, right? A form that's going to make their life easier. And what strikes me, and I didn't get a chance to really talk about this during the podcast, but in some research I've been doing with marketing agency I work closely with, we found that for behavior to change, if people are going to buy a new brand or buy a new product, one of the first things they have to be convinced of is that it's going to make their life easier. And it just was running through my mind. And it was like, we didn't have time to get to that part, but I wanted to dig into that. And maybe when we do round 2 with Jay, we'll be able to dig in that, like should people make life easier for their customers? And that just really hit me because he talked about that concept multiple times, but it comes out of his curiosity and his humility that he was able to ask those questions. And basically, hey, we're not making life easy enough. How do we make it even better?
Yeah, absolutely. And the part that I try very hard personally is to just keep really good company. And surrounding yourself with people like Jay and the people he has on his podcast are so awesome. And I love that. And our listeners, our regular listeners will know this was a little bit of a different episode for us, going so deep into the personal stuff, into the spiritual side of things. And I love that he is so open and vulnerable to sharing his faith on a public platform. And not shying away from that, I think, is just such a sign of strength as a leader. And that's very much the philosophy of the people that he has on his show as well. So anybody that would like to go deeper into some of these types of topics, switch over to the Higher Leader podcast. It's really, really an awesome podcast. So I am thrilled. I absolutely know that we are going to have Jay back on the show. Because you got through, I think, 2 of your 12 questions on part A.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So Tony, as always, such a treat doing this show with you. I enjoy it so much and appreciate you as well.
Thanks, Betsy. It's been great again.
All right. Well, that's a wrap for this episode of the Really Know Your Customer podcast. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Really Know Your Customer. We hope you gained a lot of value from being here today. If you want to learn more about the work Betsy and Tony do to help their clients thrive, visit Betsy at thecongruitygroup.com and Tony at tonybodo.com. See you next time on the Really Know Your Customer show.